did other ideas try to like jump in and be like, oh, here's an even smaller game idea that you could finish in 3 months?
Well, I don't know if any ideas ever come in as smaller. you know, typically it's like you have this grand vision, and it's like then you have to do the painful work of cutting it down. But yeah, definitely ideas would come in, and they would sound really good in the moment. And it was tempting to just say, oh well, I won't work on Sword Slinger tonight. Instead, I'll prototype this for 3 or 4 hours. And you kind of do have to put that in the background. If you have a really good idea, I usually just like write it down or take a note or something like that and finish the game that I really want to. And the interesting thing is that when I do that, I actually find out that I like the idea less after about a week. Like I'll get this really cool idea, I'll be obsessed with it for a few days, and then as I start thinking about it more, thinking about all the systems that need to go into it, I start to realize like, wait, I don't even know how to make this game fun. I don't even know how to make it look good. There's all of these challenges come up when you marinate on it a little bit, and then it actually becomes less attractive. So I usually just let it simmer in the background, and it typically just dies away.
So this video was a lot of fun to make. I'm talking to the creator of Sword Slinger, which is available now on Steam. It's a small indie game made with Godot. It's really fun. You should definitely check it out. And it was a blast talking to him about his game design process, the things he went through making the game. And this is the first part in a series of interviews like this where I just talk to people before they're famous. And it's just a lot of fun to work through, and I hope you enjoyed as well. I'm going to start off with the trailer for Sword Slinger for the people who don't know what the game is, and then after that we'll roll right into the interview. Thanks for watching. Well, I appreciate you doing this. I'm new to this, so I may not be super great at it, but I'm excited, and this is the first one that I'm doing, and yeah, so I appreciate your time.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I appreciate you inviting me because yeah, I'm happy to be a guinea pig for this, and this is my first time doing this as well. So yeah, I'm glad to see that you enjoyed Sword Slinger and wanted to find out more about how I made it and all that good stuff. So yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I guess we can just jump right in. I kind of have an outline. I figured some of it may, just kind of flow with the conversation. But and anytime you want to jump in and add anything, then feel free. But
Okay.
I guess first off, if when the video is published, I know what Sword Slinger is, and I played it a little bit, and but I'll give you a chance to just give kind of the quick game pitch about what Sword Slinger is.
Yeah, Sword Slinger is a puzzle game about slaying goblins in the level by manipulating your sword with what I call magical behaviors. And these magical behaviors are small blocks of, I guess you could say, behaviors. So basically, you'll have like a throw action where you can manipulate the trajectory that the sword is thrown at. And then you can have triggers like a bounce trigger where after it hits terrain, you can then cause another action to happen. So you basically chain all of these things together to manipulate the sword in the correct way to kill all of the enemies on the screen. One of my friends actually called it sort of like you're building a Rube Goldberg machine, and you basically just keep tweaking it until it behaves exactly as you want it to. And the cool thing about that is that that just naturally presents basically an indefinite amount of solutions to every level. Because I've seen levels approached, from every direction, approaches that I wouldn't even have thought of during development, and just to see that there's such a wide variety of solutions that work for each level is really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, that what you said about the Rube Goldberg, I hadn't thought about that specifically, but it resonates because building Rube Goldberg machines was part of kind of the introduction to engineering at the school that I went to, and it's
Okay.
supposed to kind of introduce you to that programming way of thinking, and that was going to be one of the things I brought up about the game is I think it's been really awesome or I see a lot of potential for it in games like it to just kind of introduce you to that chain of reaction programming mindset where you're kind of, it is a lot like, it's just a lot like programming, or at least I feel like it is.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I've seen a few bits of feedback that kind of touch on that as well. Like, hey, this feels like a programming game. This feels like a logic game, and it kind of is because you have a bunch of parameters in each behavior block to tweak, and it's naturally iterative, right? You play it, you make a tweak, you play it, make a tweak, and that's kind of the approach to programming. And then being able to break down a larger solution into smaller logical parts is definitely a big part of that. So yeah, I mean, I didn't design it intentionally to be that way, but it just happens to work out that, yeah, it does have a lot of the same concepts that, programming and logical thinking um, involve.
Yeah, I think that's why it stuck out to me so much, because I'd seen your post on Reddit, on the Godot subreddit, and that's kind of what I was thinking. I was like, man, it seems like a programming game, and like some other games that I've seen, they're similar kind of mechanic, but with less freedom. That was the other thing I was going to say, is that it's amazing how well, because it feels like a lot of games are trying to create situations where you have to solve a problem, and it makes you feel like you have a lot of freedom in solving it, but really you don't. You just kind of have to do the right thing, and it makes you feel like you discovered it, but in actuality, all the other players are discovering that exact solution, which is fine, and those games are great. But that's the thing that I like so much about playing Sword Slinger, is that I truly felt like, hey, I wonder if I'm doing things that other people really aren't doing.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you experienced that. I share that, kind of, I don't want to say disdain, but it is kind of disappointing when you figure out, oh, the game is just giving you the illusion of choice and variety. But yeah, I have seen quite a few people play the game, and all of the approaches are vastly different. And so, and I had playtesters, playing it all throughout, playing the demos. I've sent my friends early versions of the full game, and they would sometimes record their screen and show me their solutions. And it was amazing to see the things that people came up with, and yeah, and I like to keep that openness, because I definitely don't like when games like give you the runaround and just give you the illusion.
Yeah, I just think it's great, and I think it's I don't know, like I said, it kind of stuck out just from keeping an eye on, because I feel like a lot of games kind of fly under the radar, and it's nice to be able to see things on just the different Reddit communities, because I feel like I'm getting a sneak peek at things that other people haven't discovered yet. So it's just fun. So it's cool that you were making a lot of that development public.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm trying to get better at too, is getting more eyes on the game early, because it does help a lot. I did do several rounds of feedback on Reddit, and specifically the Godot subreddit, and a lot of that feedback was very, very valuable and very actionable. And I implemented a lot of it, and then I would go back and post once I had made a few rounds of changes, and have people play it again, and it would usually be a new batch of people every time, and I would get new feedback and fresh eyes on it, and it was awesome. So yeah, definitely something I'm trying to do more often is get more people to play my stuff early, because it's super helpful.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I haven't published a game on Steam, but I feel that feeling of like when I'm working on something and I try to keep it close to my chest, and I'm like, if other people see it, I'm trying to perfect it before they see it, and I'm kind of neglecting the fact that if they see it early, they can help me perfect it, and those kind of things. But so we've talked about Godot. What are the other? What do you think the other tools are that have been the most used, I guess, in the development of this game?
Yeah, so I use Sprite for my sprite creation and my art, just because it's a wonderful program with tons of functionality. And it does everything that I need to do. It's really approachable, really accessible, especially for non-artists like myself. So I use that. I use VS Code as my editor. I'm actually using C# for my Godot development. And then there is another sort of workflow tool that I actually wrote up in TypeScript. It's a GitHub action that automatically exports your Godot games and attaches them as binaries to a release on your repository. So I have that running on all of my game projects, and all I have to do is push a tag up to GitHub, and it will automatically build my games. They'll be available for download, 5 minutes later. So that's definitely helped speed up, my ability to churn out demos, and, complete builds for upload on Steam and itch.io and other places.
That's awesome. That's my favorite. That's you. That's one of my favorite parts about things is just the little optimizations that you can develop yourself. The only thing that I've
Yeah.
done similar to that is there's a project I'm working on, and I have a Python script that I'm usually in my terminal anyway, and now I can basically log. It's like a time tracker just in my own terminal where I can just say the part of the game that I'm working on, whether it's gameplay or art, and then it just kind of uploads on its own all of my time to a Google spreadsheet because I'm trying to get better about actually tracking like my development time. So I love
Oh, yeah.
things like that.
Yeah, that is. I mean, anything that you can automate is, it's awesome. It's definitely fun to make those tools in the first place, but then just having that convenience now at your disposal is really nice.
Yeah, for sure. Do you wish that Godot had a like in-engine sprite editor?
Yeah, I don't. So I've seen this actually come up a few times in the community, this discussion, and I don't personally think that Godot needs a sprite editor, because there are other open source applications that you can use to make your sprites, right? And I think if Godot obviously embraces the open source, free and open source software, right? So I think Godot maybe should advertise like this is the application that we recommend for doing your sprite editing. I just feel like it's one more thing into the engine if you add it that has to be maintained, that might fall out of maintenance or something. Like it's just one of those things that has the potential to just get tacked on there and then slowly die off and be neglected. And so I think I personally believe that just a more focused approach and actually facilitating the game, the actual game logic functionality stuff is more important.
I'm with you. Yeah, it's like why try to take on something like a sprite when it's it's great to use and it's one of the best, and if Godot started on that, it's like another uphill battle.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean I could understand if you had like an actual like team on payroll, somebody who could spend a good chunk of their time maintaining this thing, but the nature of it being open source is it could be finished, quote unquote finished, and then just lack features that people would need for years. So I yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, that's one of the areas that like I don't know that when I first found out about Godot, it was basically when I was just playing around with testing different things, and I don't know that the open source really mattered to me as much at the beginning, but it's definitely become more appealing as time has gone on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm kind of scared to dip my toes into the C++ engine code. But just being able to go onto something simple like the issue tracker and see, hey, is this thing I'm experiencing already logged by somebody else? Can I add information to the thread? Or can I just go ahead and open a new issue? And the great thing about the Godot community, at least in my experience, is that my issues generally get responses in a very timely manner. So that's awesome to have that transparency and to have that ability to go in and see all of the things that are being actively tracked, which you don't necessarily get a view into when you're dealing with something proprietary like Game Maker Studio or Unity, right? You don't know what's on their radar at all times.
For sure. Yeah, I've experienced that a little bit as well. I kind of told somebody one time that it's like the code is kind of the secret documentation, because there's been some things that I've been looking for specifically around like the tile set functionality, and I was trying to figure out, I can't remember exactly what it was. It was something to the extent of like I had a tile map and I wanted to be able to add multiple collision shapes to the same cell basically, and there was no intuitive way for me to switch to a previous collision. And you mentioned being scared of the C++ code. I was like, I have to do it. I have to dig into this. And I went in there and I found some reference, and it was like I was able to find something in there that clued me to where to go in the engine to actually do what I wanted. And it wasn't very intuitive, and I felt like it needed to be changed, but it's just been kind of the secret documentation.
Yeah, yeah, I've used the code for some things like that too, like things that are lacking documentation. it's generally pretty easy to go in and find the relevant section of code and then pull out the information you need from that, even if it's just learning like, oh, I can't do that. It's that's still useful in a way, right?
Yeah. Did you start with Godot, or did you use any other game engines before?
No, I was mostly working with Game Maker Studio and then Game Maker Studio 2. Um, but I switched to Godot right around when 3.0 became an alpha version, right? So they were publishing alpha versions for testing. And I saw that they were supporting C Sharp at the time too. And I really wanted to move away from Game Maker Studio because just the scripting is like, it's pure scripting. You can't really apply software design patterns in Game Maker Studio. And it just generally had a lack of built-in functionality. Like, physics, you had to do all of yourself. There was no built-in vector type. So it was like, I wanted something with more structure and more built-in functionality for me to use. And Godot had all that stuff. And then it had C Sharp on top of that, which is a language that you can obviously apply lots of different design patterns in if you want to. So yeah, so that's when I switched, and I have been working in it ever since.
That's awesome. Yeah, another similarity. I worked in Game Maker Studio for a while and experienced some of the same problems. Like even trying to make a platformer, and I was getting, just having to worry constantly about all these different physics problems, and it was complicated. But do you think
Yeah.
that? Do you think that? How long do you think it'll be before Godot? I guess we're still really waiting for like the big showcase, reel of Godot games to make, because it feels like Godot is still very new on the scene, and people are kind of waiting for something to break through, if that makes sense, to really say like, hey, Godot is making these games, and then eventually maybe there'll be a AAA game made and there'll be a studio built around Godot. And do you think that's actually possible, or do you think it'll always kind of stay more of a kind of a hobbyist and solo team kind of game engine?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely possible, especially with a large community, and especially considering like it's like the big one of the open source game engines. Um, I'm not sure that indie studios that exist currently are going to switch to Godot. I think that perhaps we need a few years for people who started with Godot, like us, or like the rest of the community, to get to the point where they're publishing, the types of really successful commercial games. And I think that's just a matter of time. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put it past like a few years before we see a really big title that's made in Godot. I mean, you're already seeing really high quality stuff coming out of the community. And I think the issue right now is just that there are no big name studios, right? And, to become a big name studio, you have to publish a big game. So it's like, we're kind of waiting for that one game to make it big. And then I think it'll be more mainstream.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. So we probably talked about Godot enough, and I want to talk mostly about Sword Slinger, but
Okay.
and I kept pulling us back to Godot, so that's on me. But
I love Godot, so.
yeah. How do you? I'm looking through the questions.
Okay.
So you've already Sword Slinger's on Steam, which is something that I feel like is an achievement that a lot of people really never get to. I don't know. They never publish the game. Maybe they upload demos or something on itch, but there's just something about uploading on Steam that's kind of a big, it's just kind of a big barrier, and it's like, wow, this is not to say that somebody that doesn't upload on Steam isn't a game developer or anything like that, but it's just a big achievement. But how long did it take you think, from kind of ideation of the idea through development to actually finish the game and get it posted on Steam?
Yeah, so I think it was about 7 or 8 months from start to released on Steam, which isn't terrible. I was originally targeting a 6-month timeline, and the reason that I was targeting something shorter is because the previous project I had dropped because I was like, oh, this needs a year or two of development if it's just going to be me. And I was like, this idea is way too big, right? So I kind of went back to basics, and I said, okay, I'm going to make a puzzle game with like 50 levels that I'm just going to see if I can get it done in 6 months and then sell it for like $5. That was kind of my goal from the start, was puzzle game, $5 on Steam in 6 months. Took a little bit longer than that, but yeah, I mean, I'm happy with how it turned out. And the only reason it took longer is because I was getting lots of good feedback from the Godot community, and I wanted to make sure that all of it was addressed, and then it felt really good. And then, integrating the finalized stuff like Steam achievements, and I had to make a sort of a an in-game achievement system for the people that are on itch.io so that they could still have achievements without, or I didn't want to lock them out of achievements. In other words, I didn't want to make it only exclusive to Steam, right? So a lot of that final like overshoot of a couple months was just doing little stuff like that and getting the store pages set up and some marketing and all that good stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, those last little bits. I mean, those are important because, I mean, even when I was playing Sword Slinger and I saw the achievements pop up, that was like a kind of a checklist in my mind. It's like, wow, he put in the time and he made the achievements work, and not all games do that. I actually didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know about the in-game solution for the achievements for itch, but that's a really good thing to think of as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's, you just provide an in-game display and you save the achievements to a file or whatever, and then you just sync that with the Steam database, and it all works out for the most part if you do everything correctly.
That's awesome. That's cool. What do you think? Do you like the kind of the experience publishing games on Steam or itch better?
Itch is definitely easier. It is super simple to set up a store page. I mean, I think a lot of people in this community have done it, It's really simple. You just upload your assets, you write a few paragraphs, and then you upload your builds and you're done, right? With Steam, it's like there's so much technical stuff that you have to do. You have to read their SDK manual. You got to make sure that if you're using the Steam API, you got to ship your binaries with the appropriate libraries, the Steam API libraries. And it's just, getting the actual, they call them depots, the game files, configured correctly in the Steam backend and then uploaded and then set it live on a branch and all this. It's just a lot to do. And then you also have to do stuff like, hey, this is the languages it supports. Here's, all of my store assets. Oh, if you want to post a news release, well, that's actually different assets now. And it's just, yeah, it is a lot. It is an undertaking to get something up on Steam.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that makes it such a big achievement. Because, like you said, itch is pretty easy. It just kind of, that's why it's perfect for game jams, because you don't have to worry about spending a lot of time uploading. It just works. But
yeah. Well, then the other terrible thing about Steam too is you need to pay that $100 up front to get listed on the store, which is a huge negative, especially if you're not going to be selling a whole lot of copies, right? I recommend, doing it just for the experience, but chances are, if you're like me, you won't make that money back anytime soon.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of conversation around the fact that, there needs to be a fee so that it keeps, because Steam would kind of turn into itch where there's a ton of game jam games or something that people aren't even trying to sell. And I kind of understand that, but it is refreshing to know that, if it's a good game, people will find it and you can market it. And so itch still works, which is exciting to see.
Yes. Yeah. And there's no reason why you can't do both.
Sure. Yeah. And I guess that's the other good thing too, is you get even more of an audience, because there's people I'm sure that use itch that won't even touch Steam anymore, maybe, but I don't
yeah.
know. So so you talked about using Game Maker. What was the kind of the main thing? Have you been making games for like a really long time, or was there a specific time where you were like, okay, I want to start making games, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I was like a young teenager when I started doodling with computers, making silly websites and then, getting into game development. I think I actually started with Game Maker like 8.1 or something like that, like the really old classic version of Game Maker. But yeah, I mean, it was just, I think a lot of young teenagers like me just kind of get into computers and they explore all this stuff, right? And that's kind of where I just started making games, and I kept making small little games, throughout the years. And I just kind of consistently did it, but I never did it with any real purpose. It was mostly just like a fun thing. Hey, I'm going to make this game and show my friends, It wasn't like I was grinding away making games, but yeah, but I've always had an interest in it. I've always liked doing that. And, as I've done, software engineering for school and for my career, it's just become easier and easier to do the technical aspects of game development. So it's just been fun. I've been enjoying it for a number of years now, and now I'm trying to take it more seriously, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a good place to live, I guess, with the keeping it fun, smaller projects and they build into larger projects, and I think the software engineering career, at least for me, has felt very complimentary for game development.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely gives you a good leg up if you already have the technical know-how. Um, yeah, it's it's hard to learn the other skills like art and marketing and video editing if you're doing a YouTube channel and your own trailers and stuff, right? But the programming, the technical aspect can really make or break a game, especially if you're doing something that's more complex. If you don't know how to design a complex system and make it maintainable, that could easily sink your project, or leave it bug riddled or something. So it definitely helps a lot.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, there's still some times though that I'm like, man, I'd love to trade in these technical skills for some art skills. But
Yes, I feel that. Yeah.
yeah, because I see some people that are making such cool stuff, and I'm like, man, if I could just do that. But yeah, it's kind of a struggle to build up to
Yes.
that, which is another skill. But yeah. So what's your? We've talked about a lot of these things actually, but what's your? I guess if you could like if you were on a team and you were a part of like an indie studio or something, and everybody kind of had different tasks. What part of game development do you think you would like to live and just focus on that specific part, if there is one?
Yeah, I mean, I like doing the technical stuff. I like implementing the mechanics and the systems that support the game, But I do like the actual process of design too, like thinking through the the different design considerations that you have to do, the smallest things from like, how much health does the player have to, how do these two systems interact? And is this too complicated? Do we need to cut this down? Is this fun? Are these levels designed in a way that is conducive to exploration or, whatever? Like that's the kind of stuff that I like to do on top of implementing them on the technical side. So, that would kind of be my ideal role is kind of like, you know, design or co-design or something like that, but also have a hand in the technical decisions and architecture and all that stuff.
Do you have a desire to work as part of a larger team, or do you plan on just kind of trucking along as a solo indie dev?
I would definitely like to, yeah, work in a larger team, but I don't want to make somebody else's game, which is why I like doing solo work or work with a really close friend of mine. We actually, me and this friend have talked about doing an indie studio in the future. So we're starting to dip our feet into seeing if we can make a commercially viable game, just the two of us in our free time. Just kind of putting a feeler out there and seeing what happens from that. But yeah, I would definitely want to work in like a smaller, tight knit team where we all have a good amount of say in the outcome of the product. I wouldn't ever want to be on like a AAA team or something like that and just grinding away at code for 12 or 14 hours or whatever during crunch time.
While you were working on Sword Slinger, was it difficult? Did you have other ideas that were kind of showing up that were like, oh, I'm working on, you said you wanted to work on a puzzle game, $5, 50 levels. Did other
Mhm.
ideas try to like jump in and be like, oh, here's an even smaller game idea that you could finish in 3 months?
Well, I don't know if any ideas ever come in as smaller. you know, Typically it's like you have this grand vision, and it's like then you have to do the painful work of cutting it down. But yeah, definitely ideas would come in, and they would sound really good in the moment. And it was tempting to just say, oh well, I won't work on Sword Slinger tonight. Instead, I'll prototype this for 3 or 4 hours. And you kind of do have to put that in the background. If you have a really good idea, I usually just like write it down or take a note or something like that and finish the game that I really want to. And the interesting thing is that when I do that, I actually find out that I like the idea less after about a week. Like I'll get this really cool idea, I'll be obsessed with it for a few days, and then as I start thinking about it more, thinking about all the systems that need to go into it, I start to realize like, wait, I don't even know how to make this game fun. I don't even know how to make it look good. There's all of these challenges come up when you marinate on it a little bit, and then it actually becomes less attractive. So I usually just let it simmer in the background, and it typically just dies away. But I do have a few ideas that I get randomly that I do have like in a long term like document or notes or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's amazing how, and I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to, probably not just with game development, but any kind of field or hobby or anything where it takes time to create something. It's that initial feeling that it's like, wow, I can really dedicate myself to this, and then you realize the next morning it's like, if I wouldn't buy it, but
Yeah.
um,
Well, there's those moments of slog too, right? In the middle of a development where it's like those are where you're most vulnerable, I think, to starting a new idea is when you're just in the absolute terrible part of development where you have like just tedium to work through. And that's just been part of every project I worked on, and that just becomes a game of discipline to just like slog through it and get the tedious part over with. And then eventually within the same project, like Sword Slinger, there was lots of moments where it's like, oh, I really don't want to work on this part. But then, you get over that, and then you get to the next exciting part of the game that it's brand new that you need to build, and it becomes fun again. So it's like, there's those ups and downs throughout the whole development. But yeah, I think people are particularly vulnerable, at least I am, to dropping a project right when you're at the bottom of tedium and labor.
and that's what people want to know. I think is that I think there's a lot of people that want to make games. That's obviously been proven. There's a lot of people working on games, and that's why getting something on Steam, I think, is such a big achievement, because there's a lot of people that haven't really internalized the fact that I can actually finish my game. You know what I mean? They kind of get maybe addicted to new ideas, or maybe they just get stuck in the tedium, and they don't have examples to draw on where they're like, okay, I did this, I can do it again. And I've seen some of that from other fields and authors and things like that. They're like, you just have to write one book, and in the second book you're like, I did it before, I know I can do it again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's definitely important. Like, you see this advice all the time. You start small, participate in game jams. Like, all of that stuff is useful advice because it shows you how to go through the highs and lows in a very condensed period. And it shows you what it's like to go through the life cycle of a project, because I think the life cycles are pretty similar no matter the sizes of the project, right? You get that initial burst of excitement when you're working on it, and then you have the tedium of implementing some systems or some mechanics or just doing level design. That was a big thing for Swordslinger, right? I had to design 50 levels by hand, which gets kind of old after a while. But then you get to the fun parts again, and you get to experience that whole loop over a 48 or 72-hour period with a game jam, and that's much easier to just dedicate 3 days of your life to doing that than to dedicate a year and find out the hard way that you did something wrong.
For sure. Yeah. Did you ever think about trying to procedurally generate any of the levels?
Yeah, I did think about that actually. It's kind of difficult because there is a certain amount of playtesting you have to do to make sure that a level has a solution, right, with Swordslinger. But I thought, it would be interesting to see if I could have like an endless mode where the levels would just be generated on the fly, and have some sort of algorithm that could determine how to make easy, medium, or hard levels, and then just basically provide a user with, hey, these are not handcrafted, but here's a different scenario every time. I didn't pursue that, mostly because it was going to add time to the project, and also it was really unclear to me, and it's still unclear to me, how I would make a system like that felt good. Now, I haven't really thought about it too much. I'd like to experiment with it, but yeah, we'll see. I mean, that might be something that just remains an idea, or I might visit it eventually.
Yeah, I'm with it. And that makes sense. I think not every game needs to be Spelunky or whatever and have, an infinite number of levels. Because I thought about it when I played Swordslinger. I was thinking, I was like, man, I was trying to imagine, like, if I had made this game and I wanted to make procedural generation, I was like, I have no idea how I would prove that the level could actually be beaten, because there's so many, you could iterate through the possibilities of the actions and the triggers, but there's so much granular control that you have that I don't know. I just feel like it would be very difficult.
Yeah, it's almost the kind of thing where like you'd have to develop some sort of heuristic, or like have some way of analyzing the existing levels and then comparing that to like a heuristic, or using a heuristic to compare that to a randomly generated level, and just make like a best guess, like this one probably should be solvable, right? Like that's kind of like as abstract as I can think about that problem. That might be totally unworkable in practice, but something like that might work, but I don't know.
Do you think that? Do you think, as far as Swordslinger is concerned, and you think about like the next game you make, or the future projects, do you think they'll follow kind of a similar theme and people will look at the games and be like, okay, this was made by this developer and I recognize it? Or do you plan on being more diverse and kind of playing with different genres and styles and things like that?
I'd like to achieve a balance of both, really. Because there are those studios and developers that just make absolutely killer games, even if they, go to different genres and stuff. But you can still tell, like, this was made by this developer, because you can tell because of how the game feels or how the systems work together. And so it would be nice to kind of strike a balance between both of those things. I definitely don't want to be just like a puzzle game developer or like a roguelike developer. I want to definitely try out different things, try out different genres. I want to get into 3D development eventually. So, but yeah, I want people to be able to tell like when me and my friend have made a game. I want there to be that kind of signature that's sort of in the game's essence. I don't know if that makes sense, but sometimes you just know, oh, this developer made this game. Hey, this looks like a X developer game.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking about, is that little piece where, because it's happened where I see a game and I'm like, this really strikes a chord with me, and then you're like, oh, this other person did actually make this game, and that's always kind of a cool feeling that they're able to create that kind of legacy.
Yeah, for sure. That's something that I definitely want to try to achieve. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I did want to ask, what besides Sword Slinger, what do you think, just generally the games that you played over your life, what are your favorite games, and especially maybe the ones that you feel like have influenced when you work on a game and the projects you finished? What are the games that kind of influence those?
Yeah, so oddly enough, I don't actually get a whole lot of influence from the games that I like to play. I get influence from games that I see that have cool mechanics, but I don't typically play. So, for example, I played an ungodly amount of League of Legends in the past, but none of my game ideas have been influenced by that game at all. And, because it's just like a MOBA, it's like, what can you borrow from that? But Sword Slinger was developed in part because of that game Noita. Have you heard of that one? Yeah, so like everything's pixel simulated, but what really got me thinking about the systems and putting smaller blocks together was the wand editing system. And that was really cool to me, how you could go through this semi-random, world, pick up different parts for your wand and stick them together, and you get like something really, really cool or really terrible, depending on how you put it together, right? And that's what really got me inspired to make a puzzle game that kind of borrowed elements of that. So Sword Slinger is kind of the same deal. You build your solution out of smaller blocks. It's a lot more simple than Noita, but that's where the inspiration came from. And I'm actually borrowing that for another sort of prototype that I'm working on now, which is like, it's kind of the same deal. You build a gun out of parts, and each part affects how the bullets come out of the gun, differently. It might be too close to Noita, but I'm trying to see if I can make it more unique. But that's kind of. But I didn't spend a lot of time playing Noita. That's the thing. I only spent like 2 hours just because I wanted to experience what that system was like, and I had never touched it again. So,
sure. Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'd heard of the game, and I saw kind of the really cool GIFs and videos and things of the individual simulation. I was like, wow, that's an amazing technical achievement. It wasn't so much my game. The closest game I can think of to that I've played was Terraria. I played that a good amount, but yeah, I think that's awesome. The gun game, I'm excited for that. That sounds pretty cool. And now I have to check out Noita now that you've mentioned it.
Yeah, Noita's fun for at least a little bit. I mean, I think the novelty wears off kind of after a bit, but that's probably just me. That's probably just my personal preference.
I played League of Legends enough that I got tired of the community, and then, which I'm sure maybe you hear that a lot. And then I actually ended up in college. The closest I played to it was Smite. If you've played that at all.
Yeah, I knew a lot of people that played Smite. Yeah.
And that was pretty fun. But I agree. There's nothing. I don't play Smite or League of Legends, and I'm like, yeah, I could do that. I could make a game like this. But
yeah, those aren't really I don't know like how inspirational competitive games are to game development. Like I don't play CS:GO and think, oh man, like I could really borrow some ideas because it's just kind of like a generic FPS. It's kind of the same for other multiplayer games. It's mostly about your interaction with other players, which could be an inspiration, I guess, if you want to make a multiplayer game. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. The main example I can think of is like Rocket League. To me, feels very innovative in the sense that it's a multiplayer game, team game, and it's got all these cool features. But again, it's not something that I think like, okay, let me pick this apart and really start working on my own improvement on this genre. But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
that's pretty interesting. So besides game development, and it sounds like you spend a lot of time doing software just because of game development and your job, obviously. But what are some hobbies that you have besides things programming related?
Yeah, so it was, I mean, game development's my main hobby, but I do play guitar. I play a lot of metal music on my guitar. I'm not very good, but it's fun and it's cathartic and I enjoy it. So it's mostly just like a personal, like relaxation sort of therapy-esque thing for me. Um, that's mainly what I do and occasionally I'll play games with friends, when I have free time or when I really don't feel like working. So yeah, that's basically my hobbies.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, game development just kind of takes over.
Yeah, well, there's so much to it too. Like some days I'll just spend the night doing art. And then another day I'll design the system that I need to support my game, and then the other day I'll actually be stitching all those pieces together. So there's a lot of variety in game development as a concept, which keeps me interested.
Yeah, that's been kind of a theme, I think, for people and successful people that have gone through and made their own games. They always kind of say, like, it's always nice because if I get tired of doing one thing, I can switch contexts, I can work on something else. And that's really important when you're working by yourself.
Yeah, it is, and it's not a luxury that you get when you're just doing like software development, application development, because it's like you have a spec that you need to meet, and it's like you either do it or you don't. You don't get the freedom to tinker with things and to kind of put your own schedule together. Usually.
For sure. Yeah, I'm with that. Yeah, that's why it's sometimes it's easier to get more fired up about game development than it is an Angular app or a React app.
Yes, exactly.
Well, cool. Well, I think I originally told you that we talked for maybe around 20 minutes, and we're coming up on 45, so hopefully I haven't taken too much of your time.
No, that's good. Yeah, it was fun.
Is there anything else that I left out that you wanted to mention or talk about or anything? If not, that's okay.
I don't think so.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. It sounds like we have a lot of similarities. I was interested as soon as you started talking about working on Angular, and it's pretty cool. But obviously, the main difference is you have a game on Steam. So congratulations, and it really is a lot of fun. I'm not just saying that. I enjoy playing it. It's my kind of game as far as the mechanics and things. And I really think that if people haven't played it, I don't know. I think if people see it, I really think it has a lot of potential. I think people will enjoy it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed it.
Yeah. And maybe we'll talk again sometime, and I'd love to do another interview when you release another game, because I'm sure that's on the way.
Yeah, I am 100% down for that.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you for talking.
Thank you.